Bad listing photos will cost you thousands of dollars when it comes to selling your home. Buyers make split-second decisions on listing photos, and if your home doesn't stand out, they're going to scroll right past it. And that likely means fewer buyers, less demand, and ultimately a lower selling price. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to prepare your home for stunning listing photos that actually attract buyers, create demand, and also help you sell for top dollar. With that, I want to start by talking about why photos matter. You only get one chance to make a first impression, and those first impressions are actually what drive buyers' interest. Like you, many buyers out there that are considering buying a property are on the internet. They're scrolling their phones, they're looking on the computer, and that's exactly how they're determining whether or not they want to see a particular home. So if the photos are bad or not portraying the property in the proper way, then that likely means that the buyer is going to move on to another property. Remember, exposure drives demand and demand drives price. So how do you get more exposure? You get more exposure by setting the best first impression you can so that it ultimately creates this demand around your home where multiple people want to see it. And that's ultimately how you lead to a higher selling price. The reality is homes with professional photos actually sell for more money and for top dollar. But with that said, not all professional photos are the same. And that's exactly why I want to take some time in today's video and walk you through what I think is important before you're actually there taking photos of that property. Some things you can do to prep, maybe a couple of days before, and even the morning or day of, so that your home shows in the best possible light. In fact, the real estate agent you hire should be paying out of the commission that they're going to earn at some point in the future a professional photographer to come in and photograph that home. Now, here's the thing, I do a lot of content online on YouTube. I have the ability, I have the equipment to go into a property and take professional photos. In fact, I know how to do it. But the reality is I don't have the experience that a professional has in that field, and that's exactly why I pay an expert to do it. Now, some real estate agents will probably tell you you don't need professional photos, you don't need this because the property is going to be online and people are just going to want to see your property anyway. And that's exactly when you should turn and run, because that likely means that agent that you're talking to is not a professional. They don't have the experience necessary in order to help you get top dollar and also maximize time. So instead of continuing to beat down on those agents that say photos aren't worth it, I want to spend some time here and actually talk about what you should focus on. Prior to talking about rooms specifically, I just want to talk about the overall property in general, because what I find more often than not is sellers don't know what they need to do without someone telling them. And even then, a lot of agents don't guide their sellers through this process, so they end up using a professional photographer, but then the photos aren't great because they're not actually doing the things that we're going to talk about in today's video. So the very first thing I want you to think of when selling your home is I want you to think of it from a buyer perspective. Think of it as a buyer walking into that property. You want all the lights on. You want to open the blinds. You want clean windows in that property. And all of that should be done for the listing photos because it's going to help the property seem more open. It's going to help the property seem bright. And ultimately, it's going to make the property seem bigger. Now, a lot of people out there believe, hey, you're just using professional photography to trick people and make the property actually look bigger than it is. No, we're just trying to show the property in the best light possible. And we're using all of these tricks in order to help that property stand out. Now, the next thing we're going to focus on is deep cleaning that property prior to the photographer coming. That means cleaning the floors, cleaning the baseboards, cleaning the showers, the countertops. Everything in that property should be clean. And yes, that includes ceiling fans. I can't tell you how often I walk into a property and the ceiling fans are completely covered in dust. Now, yes, some of this stuff can be edited out in post-production, but the better shape, condition, cleanliness your property is in up front, the less of this stuff we have to do after the fact, which ultimately ends up saving time overall. Now, in addition to lighting and cleaning, we're going to make sure the property is completely decluttered. That means no personal items, no pet toys laying around, no kids' toys laying around, artwork that's on the wall from the kids' school. We're actually going to bring that down. We want less stuff on the walls. We don't want a lot of excessive decor in the property, which means we're also hiding cords, hiding electronics, the TV remotes. We're putting those away and ultimately removing all personal items from the property. Now, In the past, I've told clients, hey, listen, a lot of your personal photos aren't going to show up online anyway because of how the photos are edited. You can kind of blur some of this stuff out. The reality is you probably want to just go ahead and remove it up front so that it's not an issue later down the road. Now, the things I just mentioned can be applied to each and every room in that house, but as a general scope, you kind of want to focus on those items as being the basics of what you're going to do prior to the photographer actually showing up on that day. But because kitchens and bathrooms are typically the major selling points of homes, I want to take some time here and focus on the kitchen first, because that's where the photographer is going to spend a lot of time taking photos. And these are often the same photos that we're using online and in marketing materials. So we want to make sure they're picture perfect. And the very first thing we want to do is go back to lighting. We want all the lights on, and that means making sure all the lights actually work. If the light bulbs are bad, we're replacing those. And that's not just in the kitchen, that's throughout the entire house. We want to make sure all the lights are able to turn on. That includes lamps, because again, the more light we have, not only the more bright it helps the property feel, but it also helps it appear larger in many cases than it actually is. So now that we have the lights on, we're going to clear the countertops. We don't want a lot of stuff on items, toasters, all of that stuff. A lot of people have, their countertop covered in a coffee maker. And, I've walked into properties where there's dishes in the sink and there's just bills and stuff everywhere. You want to remove all of this stuff. We want the counter space to feel as large as possible, which means minimal decorations, minimal clutter on the countertops. And that also goes for things like your refrigerator. If you're somebody that likes to put magnets on your refrigerator of every place you traveled in the entire world, we're probably going to remove that. And that's again because we don't want the potential buyer to get stuck looking at the refrigerator and thinking about the clutter and whatever else and not focusing on the space as a whole. And that's going to lead me into hiding things like your trash cans, things like rugs on the floor. We want to remove these things more often than not because again, it helps amplify the space. It helps make the space look larger than it actually is. Now, what I will say is in many photograph appointments and photography appointments, we end up moving things around, right? If we're in the kitchen, I'll take the trash can out of the kitchen and I'll move it into the living room while the photographer shoots the kitchen. And it's completely cool if we have to do that as agents. But what I'll say is oftentimes we're also doing a 3D tour on that property after we're getting those photos done. And in 3D tours, it's very hard to hide these things because it's a 360 camera. It's always taking a full circle shot, so I can't be standing on one side with the trash can if that tour is shooting the entire space. So the better we can prep up front, the better those photographs are going to turn out at the end of the day. So we talked about no dirty dishes, but also make sure that the sink is clean, make sure that the counters are clean, just make sure the area is spotless. It's in theory how you would like to walk into a property. Because buying a home is an emotional process and people are constantly trying to justify it logically, people get caught up in small things. So we want the buyer thinking less about the little things in your property and more thinking about them moving into it. How does the overall space work for them? And not getting caught up in the little details of the property that could ultimately keep them from wanting to make an offer. Because you have to remember that again, these photos that we're taking here are being used for everything. They're being used for online marketing. They're being used to send to your neighbors. In some cases, they're being used in print publication or in TV or YouTube ads. So those photos are going a lot of different places. So we want to make sure we get it right on the first try. So after we're shooting the kitchen, we're likely shooting living room and dining room areas. And in these areas, we just want to make sure that it doesn't seem super tight, that it's not claustrophobic feeling, that there's not too much furniture in one room. In the case that you have a lot of furniture, multiple couches, multiple chairs, in theory, we're moving some of this out prior to that day so that we can get the best photos possible. Yes, the garage is an okay space to store things. I tell clients all the time, use your garage, but just store it nice and neatly in there because people do want to see the inside of a garage. They want to see if their cars fit. They want to see the space. Different people want garages for different things. Some want a gym. Some want to work on their cars. Some want to just park their cars. So you want to have things organized in a way that people could still go in there, but use your garage as a staging area to take things out of the home so that you can ultimately get the best photos possible. So with that, we're making sure the furniture is arranged neatly, that we don't have a lot of items laying on coffee tables and just clutter in different places. We don't want a lot of tchotchke stuff laying around. You know, I grew up in a house where we had a lot of tchotchke stuff. There was things on every counter, every shelf, everywhere in the property, and it ultimately seemed really, really claustrophobic. So today, I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to this stuff. The less, the better, and I think that's how a lot of buyers look at property. They ultimately don't want to see a lot of clutter because clutter leads to making a space feel smaller than it actually is. And one of our goals here with professional photography is we want to make that space seem large. That's why we're doing lighting. That's why we're using a wide angle lens with the property. Again, not to trick a buyer, but to help that property stand out. Now, the last thing I'll say about dining room, living room areas is turn the TVs off. Photographers are able to put, different images on TV screens through editing software. So if they want something on the screen or we want something as agents, we can have them put it on there. So you don't need to leave the TV screen on. In fact, when you leave them on, it makes it more difficult for the photographer to actually edit it after the fact. So for purposes of listing photos, we're going to have that off. And another thing we're also going to do is we're going to have all ceiling fans in the entire house off. Ceiling fans in photos create this crazy look that we don't like in photos. So all ceiling fans are going to be off prior to those listing photos being taken. So now let's transition into bathrooms. What should a bathroom look like for listing photos? Again, all the lights should work. I can't tell you how often, I have lights that are above the mirror in a bathroom. One of them is out and it just seems odd, right? So make sure all the lights in that bathroom are working. You're gonna remove the towels that you use on a daily basis. It's okay to have fresh towels in there, but we don't wanna see the towel that you just showered with that morning in our listing photos. On top of that, we're gonna close the toilet seat. We don't want toilet seats ever up in a photo. In addition to cleaning the mirror, cleaning the glass, we don't want water spots ideally. Now, a lot of times a photographer can remove it in post-production, but again, the less we have to put on that photographer to do, the better off we're going to be on our side. So we ideally want all of that stuff clean. We want to remove the rugs from the floor, like I mentioned, and we want the bathtub and the shower clutter-free. If you have 15 bottles of shampoo in your shower, maybe take it down to a couple so that it actually looks organized and not so chaotic. You kind of want it to feel like a hotel. Clean, fresh towels, not a lot of stuff going on there. And then for the bedrooms, it's exactly what you think it should be. Again, we have those ceiling fans off, we have the lights on, we have blinds open, we're making the beds, right? We're not leaving the bed in complete disarray. We're putting pillows on the bed if we have them. In addition to removing any clutter on the nightstands, making sure the lamps are on like we discussed earlier, and then ultimately removing jewelry. If you're somebody that collects watches or you have your jewelry sitting on your nightstand, we're going to take that stuff out and we're going to hide it. We're going to put it in a safe, a safety deposit box. We're going to put it somewhere else entirely because we don't want to show any sort of valuables in photos because, again, if you're doing open houses or if you have a lot of people walking through a property at one time, if you show them that there's been valuables there in the past, chances are you might have people looking for them. Now, fortunately, it's not something that happens on a normal occurrence, but you can see during open houses when there's a lot of people in a property, it's very hard to follow everyone around. And unfortunately, people do take things. So you want to hide things like jewelry. You want to hide medications if at all possible. Get them out of the house. Hide them in a place that no one would ever look. And if you're thinking in the back of your closet or in a drawer, people look there, right? You've got to get creative with this stuff, ultimately getting them out of the house. And the same with firearms, right? You want them out of the property. Now for photos, less of a concern because you're not likely going to have a firearm just laying around, but it's something to think about for when you start showing that property that you ultimately want to get that stuff in a safe place so that no one can access it. So now that we've kind of covered the interior of the house, I want to talk about the outside. The outside is where mistakes often happen with listing photos. Ultimately, we want no cars in the driveway. We want no cars in front of the house because we want to be able to take the photos of the house on the exterior at all different angles. We don't have to cut an angle short or do something we wouldn't normally do in order to not get a photo of a car or maybe a trash can or what have you in the photo. If your house is getting photographed on a day where your trash cans are getting picked up, then ultimately we're probably going to move those trash cans for the photos. That's not something that you're typically not going to do. You're not going to not put your trash cans out just because photos are there, but your real estate agent, whoever's there taking photos with them, should be moving these items so that they're ultimately not in the way. And that includes drone photography too. A lot of people don't think about it when a drone is taking, a bird's eye view of the property. You still want the property to look in its best light possible. So with that, we're making sure cars are removed, trash cans are removed, toys in the yard, whatever it is, that it's all organized and that there's not a lot of chaos going on. And this goes without saying, but ultimately you want your grass cut, you want the bushes, bushes trimmed, if you have somebody that has a lot of leaves on your driveway, on your patio, or in your backyard, you want to blow that stuff off. You ultimately want it to look picture perfect. And that also includes cleaning outdoor furniture. If you have covers on your outdoor furniture, or if your pillows are just dirty and disgusting and got cobweb, you want to clean all that stuff up prior to the listing photos. Remember, you're trying to attract people to your property, and so ultimately you want to show that property in the best way you can, which is going to lead me into talking about the swimming pool. I can't tell you how often we're photographing swimming pools and there's pool equipment roaming around in the pool and we can't get it out. I'm not a pool guy. I don't know how to remove this stuff. So ultimately you want the pool clean, right? You want it to sparkle, but you also want the pool equipment removed so it's not in the photos. Now again, some of this stuff can be done post-production, so depending on whether or not you remember to do it can impact whether or not we're having to do it later. But ultimately, if you can have it done prior to photos, then that helps us as the real estate agent, as the photographer, get the best shots possible. So with that, I want to give you a couple of bonus things to consider when doing photos in your property. We already talked about 3D tours. Just make sure your property is staged properly for 3D tours, that there's not a lot of stuff that needs to be moved around, because again, it helps with time, it helps with everything that's going to happen in that property. The next thing is make sure you're scheduling photos for the best time of the day, when light is the best in your area. You don't want it too early in the morning. You don't want it too late at night. You typically want to take photos somewhere between noon and probably 2:30 in the afternoon. That's when the sun's above. You're going to get the most natural light. You're not going to have a lot of shadows cast on different areas. Now, it goes without saying that if you're somebody that wants night photos of your property for other reasons, that you're also doing those as well. But the majority of your photos should be taken during the time of day when natural light is the best. Now, by following these simple steps, your home is going to stand out. It's going to attract more buyers and ultimately sell for a higher price. So before you list your home, make sure your photos are telling the best story possible. So with that, I want to ask you a question. How important are photos to you as a prospective buyer looking at a property? Do me a favor and let me know in the comments below. And if you found these tips helpful, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more information on selling your home. Now, if you're somebody that needs to buy a home while you're selling your home, if you're trying to do it at the same time and you're wondering how that works, well, I recorded this video that walks you through the process. Do me a favor and check it out here.